Hey everyone, Trey here, back with yet another severe weather risk for tomorrow, Sunday, October 24th, 2021. Another severe weather risk here in this secondary fall season. It's called the second season for a reason. We get these spring-like systems to come through during the fall months, and we can get these pretty potent severe weather events out of them. So this one, we've got an enhanced risk that stretches basically from far eastern Oklahoma up through the northern half of Arkansas into much of Missouri and into southwest Illinois. The main threats with this system going to be tornadoes. The potential for some strong tornadoes is there as well in that 10% hatched area there, stretching basically from far northwest Arkansas, Fayetteville, Bentonville, all the way up the I-44 corridor, Joplin, Springfield, up toward the St. Louis area, and up to the I-70 corridor there, up to about Hannibal, Missouri. But you can see the 5 and 2% areas stretch all the way down into central Oklahoma, down into far north Texas and far northwest Louisiana. So pretty widespread tornado threat here from this system. We'll also see the threat for large hail and damaging winds, 30% hatched area for damaging winds there, covering that enhanced risk area. So pretty potent system. We've also got another system that's going to come through on Tuesday for the southern plains and then Wednesday for the southeast. Going to focus on tomorrow's system for this video in particular. We'll probably do another video on the Tuesday severe weather threat coming up in a couple days. So let's get started here. Just a quick overview. It's going to be a pretty typical sort of evolution here for these systems that come through the central U.S. You can see kind of this is our water vapor satellite imagery. Here's kind of that little bit of swirl here across the western half of the country. You can see some of that moisture spreading in to the Rockies region here. And we've got a little shortwave out here that set off some thunderstorms here in far southeast Kansas, southwest Missouri this morning. But this is going to continue to move east. We're going to get a little sort of area within this larger belt of stronger flow that's going to kind of not break off, but kind of become more defined as it moves east into the central U.S. And here's our 500 millibar map from this morning, 12Z, so 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time here. You can see that kind of sort of west to east flow here with a little bit of curvature here coming into the western part of the U.S. And we already have seen some evidence of Lee cyclogenesis here on the east side of the Rockies. You can see kind of that surface low feature there, some sort of cyclonic rotation here in our surface map here, centered basically about Dodge City, give or take. So we've got our surface low there, sort of our warm front stretching off to the east, northeast there, and we've got kind of this strong sort of southerly or southwesterly flow here across the southern plains, and that's going to continue. We're going to get kind of this low to consolidate even further as this sort of part of this sort of long wave trough ejects into the plains. We're going to get more increased surface cyclogenesis here, increased southerly flow. It's going to pump that moisture from the southern part of the U.S. up to the north here with time. And you can already see here up on our 850 millibar map as well, we've got kind of this already sort of lee cyclogenesis ongoing, kind of this trough here on the lee side of the Rockies. Fairly moist air mass here in the low to mid levels. Here, this is at 850 millibars, our 12Z map as well. So let's take a look at kind of our moisture quality here. We'll go down to our typical source region here for our moisture. This is Corpus Christi. And if you recall on our system from Sunday, October 10th here in Oklahoma, we had that moderate risk in effect with the Oklahoma City metro area under the gun. We were noticing a really dry sort of air mass here down at Corpus Christi, Brownsville, the very southern portion of the country, our basically source region for our Gulf moisture. And that's not going to be the case this time. You can see here's our 12Z Corpus Christi sounding, very moist air mass here, very unstable moist air mass here. Same thing at Brownsville, lot of deep moisture here. So that's going to be a little bit more favorable for severe storms here, as that will be pumped northward into the central plains and into the Midwest tonight into tomorrow. We'll go east along the coast here. This is Lake Charles, kind of the same thing. Fairly deep sort of moist layer here. A little bit of dry air aloft here, but quite deep sort of moist layer here at Lake Charles. Here's New Orleans. Kind of the same, little bit shallower but still decent sort of moisture as you go up through the profile here at Slidell. So all in all, source region moisture looking pretty good. We'll go back out to the east and see if we've got any EML that's going to be in place. And here's Amarillo, pretty steep lapse rates here from about 600 millibars down to about 850 millibars. Very steep lapse rates there. Aloft inversion just above the surface there. We'll go back toward Albuquerque, much of the same thing there. So pretty good chance we're going to get this EML to be advected east as these sort of stronger winds sort of traverse the Rockies here and eject into the southern plains, southern and central plains. We should get kind of this EML to hang around and prevent a lot of early morning storms here. We might get some warm advection storms as that moisture really starts to stream northward. It kind of overrides that warm front associated with that surface low, and as it does so, you can get enough lift to produce sort of elevated thunderstorms, and we might have that kind of in the target area tomorrow morning. But any more robust convection should be confined to the afternoon hours, as we should have this sort of EML advected eastward throughout the day tomorrow. So that cap should hold things off until that main forcing gets there. So let's take a look at the couple models here. We'll take a look just at the NAM and the GFS here. Just for simplicity's sake, we're just going to look at these two models here. For the last couple systems, we also looked at the Euro, but getting this video out a little bit early this morning, so the Euro is not quite in yet, at least the 12Z Euro. But we've got the 12Z NAM and the 12Z GFS here. So we'll take a look at how these progress with this system and how they differ from each other as far as the representation of the background synoptic pattern. So this is our sort of initialization here for the NAM. We'll go back to our 500 millibar map here and kind of compare it to the NAM. You can see pretty good initialization. We've got strong winds here up encroaching into California, Nevada. Kind of the same here. A little bit of ridging across the central U.S., which aloft, which was in place there. And we've got kind of this big sort of closed low here up well into Canada, modeled pretty well by the NAM. So pretty good initialization here. And as we go on with time, you can see that sort of chunk, this piece of energy here, kind of traverse into the desert southwest. And it's going to amplify just a little bit as it ejects into the plains. Not super amplified here of a pattern, which usually is kind of better for your more discrete supercell chances. The forcing is not going to be really, really strong here, at least synoptically, but definitely more than adequate here for a big severe weather event. We've got a nice sort of trough here, pretty solid enhancement of the flow here around the base of that trough, with a pretty nice defluence here as you go downstream from that trough in the exit region. So areas like far southern Iowa, southwest Illinois, into much of Missouri, and even down into eastern Oklahoma and Arkansas definitely look to be under the gun here. And that amplifies a little bit more as it continues off to the east into the evening hours tomorrow. Let's take a look at the GFS depiction of this. So here's our 500 millibar map, kind of same thing, pretty good initialization here as well. That moves off, you can see kind of a little bit of amplification there, not too much though. And this is at 21Z Sunday. We've kind of got this closed contour here, so it starts to close off a little bit. Let's go to 21Z Sunday here. Pretty similar sort of depiction here, although we've got a little bit more sort of flow, a little bit more of the stronger flow confined to the backside of the system on the 12Z GFS as compared to the NAM. We've got kind of 50 to 60, 70 knots here rounding the base of that trough, whereas those stronger winds are confined here kind of to the backside of the system. So that does show that it's maybe kind of still trying to deepen here. That's why we're not seeing super sort of amplification of this trough. But overall, I think the picture is the same with both of these models. We've got this system centered here, the axis centered from basically the Omaha area down through eastern Kansas, I-35 corridor, down through central Oklahoma. Pretty much the same thing here. And in your exit region, very nice defluence as well here across much of basically much of Missouri here in our exit region. So fairly similar depiction of the 500 millibar flow here, and this would be still more than adequate for severe weather here. This kind of belt of stronger winds here encroaching into the exit region. Let's see what happens at 850 millibars here. We'll go back to the start on both of these. Alright, so here's the NAM. Kind of see what we saw on our morning map here. 850 millibars, kind of that sort of troughing here on the lee of the Rockies. Much of the same here on the NAM, same thing on the GFS. Let's go forward in time here with the NAM. So here we go, kind of get that consolidation and that low-level jet ramp up overnight here tonight as we get more defined sort of lee cyclogenesis here overnight tonight into tomorrow morning. And we're going to have a strong low-level jet in place through much of the day here. Pretty potent 850 millibar sort of circulation here. Potent low-level jet, 40, 50 to 60 knots here across much of Missouri, down into eastern Oklahoma, much of Arkansas, and then into the sort of Great Lakes region up here. So very broad, strong low-level jet here. And I think that's what we're going to see here on the GFS as well. Yeah, much of the same. Very sort of broad area of 40 to 50 plus knot winds here at 850 millibars. Much of the same here. Closed, very strong closed circulation here at 850 or 21Z tomorrow, so this would be 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Much of the same. Broad swath of strong winds here. Much of Missouri. So I'm thinking, looking like Missouri is going to be pretty much the target, which is what the SPC is showing with their outlook. Strongest low-level jet into western, central, and northern Missouri there. Kind of the same thing here as well. And then as we go on through the evening, that low-level jet really ramps up, and as that sort of 850 low moves off to the east, we should get kind of that maintenance of strong storms, strong to severe storms throughout the overnight hours into Monday morning. Let's go down to the surface, see how our surface map looks here. So we'll go here, go back to, and then so here is our surface map from this. So this is a little bit later than 12Z, obviously. This is the surface map from 11:16 a.m. So 16Z, just after 16Z. But we had kind of that surface low at 12Z, basically in the same spot here, southwest Kansas, Oklahoma Panhandle. So that's pretty much modeled well here. You can see kind of this troughing here at the surface, this sort of cyclonic flow here at the surface, warm front extending off to the east-northeast there through Kansas. So nothing too off there with the depiction. One thing that might be interesting here, not sure if it's going to make any difference at all, but kind of we've got a little bit warmer air here with the GFS farther up into Kansas. So more of these sort of mid to upper 50s here, farther up into Kansas, whereas it's much cooler here on the NAM, up into western and northwest Kansas. That is what I've seen to be kind of a NAM bias. The NAM tends to be a little bit cooler and a little bit slower with the sort of moisture transport and getting that warm, moist air mass northward. So probably just a little bit of model bias to keep in mind here. But overall, the depiction is kind of the same between the two models here of the surface pattern. So as we go forward in time here on the NAM, we get that surface low to develop southeast Colorado, Oklahoma Panhandle, southwest Kansas, and that will move off pretty rapidly during the day tomorrow. This is at 21Z, and actually let's go ahead and zoom in here to our sector, our floater sector here. And so GFS here, we'll go to the big picture before we zoom in. Much of the same. Surface low moves off to the northeast, centered basically over the Kansas City area by 21Z Sunday. So about 4 p.m. Sunday, and we'll zoom in here as well to kind of compare the two. So much of the same, little small difference in where the position of that surface low is, centered basically right over the Kansas City area and areas just north on the GFS. The NAM is just ever so slightly farther to the east, but pretty much the same. You can see the trailing sort of cold front here back to the south and southwest into central Oklahoma. Same thing here, a little bit more well-defined here on the GFS. And then you've got your warm front here kind of stretching kind of along the Iowa-Missouri border down into northern Missouri here on the GFS. One thing to note, the NAM is a little bit slower, a little bit farther south with that warm front, clearly into northern Missouri here, whereas the GFS is a little bit farther north with that warm front up into Iowa. But broad southerly flow here in the warm sector, very large warm sector here with southerly and a little bit veered flow here actually out ahead of that cold front. So that may be a concern as we'll take a look at some forecast wind profiles here in a second, but a little bit of a concern that the winds may be just a hair veered here in the warm sector. Not so much as you go up closer to the surface low, a little bit more southerly and southeasterly winds backing quickly to easterly as you go across that warm front to the north. Same thing here, southerly to southwesterly winds here in the warm sector, backing to southeasterly and easterly as you go toward that warm front here on the NAM. So pretty close depiction here, and here is our moisture return. We'll take a look at our dew points here. Low to mid 60s here up to the Iowa-Missouri border here by 21Z Sunday. And once again, you can see that NAM is a little bit farther south here with the moisture return, which is a typical NAM sort of thing. Not nearly as aggressive with the moisture return usually here. So warm front here on the NAM, a little bit farther south than the GFS here. And the NAM is also a little bit more moist than what we were seeing on the GFS. We've got, let's see, that's a 66 dew point here. So dew point's a little bit higher here. And let's kind of look at our surface map here. We'll go ahead and zoom back out just to kind of see how we think this moisture return is going to play out, and maybe which model is going to be correct here. So we'll go back, see how our depiction here is. This is going to be so our initialization here. We've got some weak sort of 60s dew points here on the NAM up into western Oklahoma. You can see that is the case. We've got 60s here all the way up even into far south Kansas here, Pittsburgh, Kansas, with a reading of a 60 dew point here. Wichita at 61 dew point. So we do have 60s dew points all the way up here into southern Kansas as of 16Z. This is at 12Z, so we'll go forward. Here's 15Z. Yeah, pretty good initialization here. It's got 70s dew points up to about the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area here on the NAM. And that's pretty close. We've got, let me go to the farther south sector here. And that's about right. Here is kind of the Dallas-Fort Worth area here, 73 dew point just on the east side of that, 70s dew points out there, all the way up into northeast Texas here. So fairly good initialization by the NAM. Let's see the GFS here. GFS, much of the same, got those 60 dew points up into South Kansas. This is interesting though. Much farther south, the GFS with the 70s dew points, not quite getting it as far north as they actually are here. And they actually mix out quite a bit throughout the day here. So in East Texas and on the NAM, that's not the case. Those 70s dew points stay pretty snug there into East Texas there throughout the day. So that is interesting. Looks like the NAM has a little bit better handle on what the actual surface moisture is looking like here across the southern plains this morning. So would maybe take the NAM a little bit more, with a little bit more, having a little bit more credence here than the GFS as far as moisture return goes. So inclined to believe that the NAM may be a little bit more correct here. We'll zoom back in here to our sector. Again, there's our warm front. And then eventually that warm sector does get pinched. Pretty progressive sort of cold front, dry line, it's kind of pseudo boundary here, which is interesting. That could sort of increase the chances for a more linear mode. And let's take a look at storm mode while we have it here. GFS pretty much the same orientation of the initiating boundary here. Here's kind of this cold front / dry line here. Here's your triple point warm front. So our initiating boundary farther to the north here, a little bit more north-south, whereas as you go off to the south and southwest, kind of more northeast to southwest oriented boundary. And if we recall our flow here, this is at 21Z Sunday. Our flow here basically due southwesterly. We'll call it due southwesterly just for simplicity's sake. A little bit more southerly as you go farther south, or excuse me, a little bit more westerly component to the winds as you go farther south. But up here, we'll say probably due southwesterly for simplicity's sake. So keep that in mind there, and we'll go back to our surface boundary here. And you can see we've got a pretty decent component of those wind vectors that are perpendicular to this boundary, especially up north. So I would think up here, closer to the surface low, we may have a little bit more chance for storms staying discrete a little bit longer, whereas down here, the flow is a little bit more parallel to the boundary. So I think farther south here into Oklahoma, especially with time, you can see that boundary kind of sort of gets even more southwest to northeast oriented. I think with time we'll see pretty quick transition to a linear mode down here, whereas up here, up on the surface low, we see that sort of boundary maintain itself sort of in a north-south fashion. I think up here near the surface lows, you're going to be your best chance for discrete storms and longer lasting discrete storms before they merge into a squall line as this kind of cold front surges east into the evening and overnight hours. All right, let's take a look at some soundings here. This is it. We'll go to 21Z here on the NAM. So we'll take actually up here. Let's go up on the warm front just ahead of the surface low. And then we'll take a few down south here just ahead of that front down into western Missouri, and then we'll take one eastern Oklahoma here. So this is our surface low sounding. This is at 21Z. Pretty solid profile here. You can see that some evidence of those winds a little bit more veered at the surface. A little bit of an inversion here hanging on. Not sure if that is a NAM bias. Only 67 degrees here at surface temperatures. We saw last week our surface temperatures were much too cool on the NAM. Not last week, but our October 10th and 12th severe weather event in Oklahoma. We saw our surface temperatures were much too cool on the NAM, so we'll have to keep that in mind for tomorrow. Some of the models are showing a little bit, again, those elevated storms lasting throughout the morning hours. They move off quickly, so the quicker those storms move off, the warmer we're going to get at the surface, the less that this inversion is going to be literal. But you can see it's kind of that evidence of that EML aloft hanging on here through 21Z. Pretty good hodograph here. Even though the winds are a little bit veered here, the low-level jet is a little bit veered. Definitely ample and adequate sort of turning of the low-level hodograph here. You can see effective helicity about 200 meters squared per second squared here at 21Z. So this would definitely be a tornadic sort of profile here. Kind of the same thing here as you go farther south into western Missouri. Winds much more veered down here, but still lots of turning into low levels. We do see a little bit of a kink here, where the hodograph kind of turns back on itself here. A little bit weaker flow here, modeled at about 800 millibars here, compared to just beneath and above it. So that is probably why we're having that sort of kink in the hodograph. But nonetheless, low-level hodograph, there is sort of adequate turning here, over 200 meters squared per second squared of effective helicity. This is farther south into eastern Oklahoma. You can see the profile, maybe quite a bit warmer down here. That inversion does kind of hang around here through 21Z in eastern Oklahoma, and the hodograph's not nearly as conducive for tornadoes here at 21Z. We'll go on to 0Z. So this would be at 7 p.m. tomorrow night. We'll go up here kind of just ahead of that surface low. Hopefully these will not be convectively contaminated here. We'll go down into southwest Missouri, and then we'll go basically Fort Smith here. Interesting. This is convectively contaminated. Let's see if we can get a sounding here out ahead that's not contaminated. So this is our sort of warm front surface low kind of sounding up here. Yeah, this is really interesting. We really get those winds in the lowest levels to strengthen, but they're very sort of veered and become even more veered with time at a couple kilometers above the surface. Surface winds here out of the south here near the warm front, a little bit contaminated, keep that in mind. And surface temperatures, once again, quite cool down here. 68 degrees, I would expect we should get some more heating, and if we can get temperatures up into the 70s, we'll have a little bit more instability to work with. But this is an interesting sort of hodograph here. Very elongated sort of hodograph here. If you look just from a numbers perspective, effective helicity well over 250 meters squared per second squared here. So just from a helicity standpoint, there is sort of numbers-wise enough to get tornadoes, but this photograph is kind of wonky. And I'm going to pull up here this sort of photograph cheat sheet. This was done by Cameron Nixon, super smart guy, graduate student up in Michigan, but he does such great work with photographs. And if we kind of compare what we're seeing here, this is kind of what we're seeing with our southeast sort of mid-Atlantic bullet mode here. What we see often in the sort of eastern seaboard here. During the spring months, we see this with fairly decent frequency. But we get these kind of elongated photographs, not a whole lot of turning, very high effective helicity, but we don't see a whole lot of turning. Winds, low-level jet kind of veered here. This is kind of what we're going to see, I think, tomorrow. You can kind of also compare it to our sort of off-season mini supercell mode. Now we're going to have quite a bit more instability than sort of a mini supercell setup. But the photograph is fairly similar. A little bit larger of a low-level photograph, but kind of the same thing. Sort of veered low-level winds, veered low-level jet, but adequate sort of effective helicity for supercellular tornadoes here. So this, I think, a tornado threat is definitely going to be there. This is the farther south mode. Pretty good instability there. Large 0 to 3 kilometer instability as well, over up to 200 joules per kilogram, which is very large for low-level instability. But you can see the surface winds very veered. But we do get kind of enough turning here for tornadoes, although not a whole lot, as you can see in the wind barbs here. So, and this is going to be farther south, eastern Oklahoma, not nearly as favorable here for supercells, although we are quite unstable, and there's quite a bit of shear here. So this is interesting. I'm not quite sure what to make of this sort of wind profile. I think there will be a tornado threat. There is enough turning, I think, here in the low levels to get a tornado threat out of these storms. The fact that they may stay discrete a little bit longer could aid the chances of seeing tornadoes from these storms. This wind profile is conducive for tornadoes. I wouldn't say it's sort of a classic sort of tornadic supercell where you have sort of backed low-level winds, really large looping photographs like what we saw in Oklahoma for our last two severe weather events back on October 10th and 12th that produced tornadoes in Oklahoma. Not quite the case here, but I think is sort of this wind profile will be conducive for maybe a few tornadoes. Strong tornadoes, I'm not quite sure I'm seeing that here, just based on the wind profile and maybe the storm morphology here. Not quite sure if the 10 hashed is necessary. I probably maybe would have kept the 5% here until we got a little bit more clarity. Now, if the winds can back a little bit more near the surface and in the low levels than what is being progged, then we would have, I think, a much greater chance of getting strong tornadoes, because we'd see these photographs a little bit more looping, low-level winds a little bit more backed. But as it stands now, I think supercells with a few tornadoes, large hail initially, and then I think things, especially with southern extent, are going to sort of line out pretty quickly. And then once that sort of cold front / dry line surges east pretty quickly, I think that'll aid the transition to a linear mode here into the evening hours. So, interesting setup here. And just for sort of our last thing we'll look at here, let's just real quickly, just for giggles, we'll take a look at some of the convective allowing models here. This is the 12Z HER. Again, these models are not very good this far out, so take these with a grain of salt, but we'll just try to look at these to get kind of a vague idea of what they're showing and kind of the storm mode. So you can see overnight we get these elevated storms up into Missouri, Iowa, maybe a large hail threat, but not, these will be elevated, so no tornado threat overnight. Then we get kind of these elevated storms here into the warm sector during the morning and early afternoon hours in Missouri. Then it clears out, and then we get storm initiation back here kind of on the Kansas-Missouri border, Kansas City, down through kind of the Emporia area. Pretty quick development here by about 22Z, so 5 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Then farther south along the front, we get the sort of radar to light up, if you will, and it's kind of that line to fill in. Now there are some embedded sort of supercell looking structures here, at least on the HER, especially with southern extent. which is a little bit surprising that the HRRR is kind of maintaining a supercell mode a little bit longer. I guess it's not really that surprising because the HRRR tends to do this quite often. It maintains a supercell mode instead of a linear mode a little bit longer than it should on a lot of setups. Kind of a broken line down here, so that's interesting. The HRRR is depicting a little bit more of a broken line, a little bit more of a messy mode farther north, which I don't know how much I believe that. I think we'll have definitely a little bit more of a supercellular mode up here, at least initially, rather than just this kind of blob of scattered storms. And then things kind of line out. Still, you've got a broken line as you go through into Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee overnight. We'll go to the WRF ARW here. Same thing, elevated storms here ongoing, overnight into northern Missouri, Illinois, Iowa. Same thing kind of in the morning hours, clears out fairly quickly, so we should have some recovery here by mid-afternoon. And actually we see these storms kind of strengthen, these kind of warm advection storms strengthen here into Illinois throughout the afternoon hours, and then that's really interesting. The ARW really holds off on robust storm initiation until late afternoon here. And then the line really kind of fills in by Tuesday, which would be 9 p.m. Not sure how likely that is. I think given the degree of forcing, I think we'll get storms easily and that cap to break easily by mid to late afternoon. Probably from about 2 to 4 p.m. tomorrow, I think we'll get an initiation. A little bit farther west than this, just given what the NAM is showing, I think we'll see initiation kind of here, western Missouri, maybe even as far east as the Kansas-Missouri border here. But as far as an evolution goes, fairly similar. Kind of a broken line. So this is also showing kind of a broken line down here into northern Arkansas, into the Ozarks, southern Missouri, with some scattered-looking supercell structures in here. So that's interesting that we're seeing a little bit more of a broken line down here with far southern extent. That could be because our forcing, our main sort of belt of forcing, we'll go back here to the NAM, is a little bit farther off to the north, so a little bit less forcing down here may yield maybe a little bit more of a discrete mode, perhaps longer than I was expecting, with southern extent, just given the boundary orientation you'd think, and the way the flow aloft is oriented with respect to that boundary, you'd think it'd be a fairly quick transition to a linear mode, but both of these models, these cams so far we've seen, have shown sort of a broken sort of line with semi-discrete supercells in it, so something to watch for sure. This is the NSSL WRF, and we get kind of these bands, so this will be interesting to note. If we do get these kind of bands out ahead of the main cold front, these could have supercell and tornado potential out ahead. It's kind of more of a southeast type setup where you get kind of these sort of convergent zones out ahead of the main surface boundary that often have discrete supercells on them. So we'll have to watch that tomorrow. If we're going to see maybe small sort of convergence boundaries ahead of the main line, that could be a potential target for supercell activity early on. And then you see kind of the line fill in fairly quickly. Some embedded supercell structures still here along this line. Interesting to note, much messier here up north on the surface low. So we'll have to keep that in mind tomorrow as well. You know, if I was targeting right now, just based on the meteorology, I would definitely target up on that surface low where surface winds are a little bit more backed. You get a little bit more curvature in the photographs, a little bit more effective helicity there in the low levels as opposed to farther south. But all these models showing kind of semi-discrete supercells here in this broken line as you go with southern extent. So something we'll definitely have to watch as we go into the day tomorrow. So interesting setup here. Again, enhanced risk from southwest Illinois, much of Missouri down into northern Arkansas, eastern Oklahoma. There will be a chance for at least semi-discrete supercells for a time with a tornado, hail, and damaging wind threat, and then I think the threat will transition to more of a damaging wind threat as we see kind of a squall line evolve into the evening hours tomorrow night into Monday morning. So if you live in these areas, stay weather aware. If you are chasing, probably going to be a tough chase, but good luck out there. Stay safe. And that's all I got for now. So thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.